People who constantly set goals but never reach them usually display these 7 traits. We've all been there, making grand plans for the new year, setting up vision boards, and promising ourselves that this time it'll be different. Yet, somehow, we fall into the same pattern, setting lofty goals and falling short right before the finish line. From my perspective as both a psychologist and someone who's also fallen into this trap, I've noticed a few common traits among folks who constantly set goals but never quite reach them. Let's take a closer look. 1. They don't have a clear why. Ever told yourself you'd lose 10 pounds or finally write that novel only to lose steam a few weeks in? Often, when people struggle to see their goals through, it's because they lack a deeply rooted motivation. Setting a goal you feel you should do, rather than one that truly aligns with your values, makes it harder to stay committed when motivation inevitably dips. I remember a time when I set a goal to run a half marathon. I had no real desire to become a long-distance runner. I just thought, everyone's doing it, so why not me? A month into training, I started dreading every run. My why wasn't strong enough to power me through the tough days. Simon Sinek, author of Start With Why, often talks about the importance of having a clear purpose. He notes that it's not just about what you're doing, but why you're doing it. When that reason resonates with you on a deeper level, like improving your overall health so you can keep up with your kids at the park, sticking to the plan becomes more natural. You're driven by more than just an external benchmark. It's now tied to your sense of self. 2. They set unrealistic expectations. Have you ever watched one of those home makeover shows and thought you could replicate the entire renovation in a single weekend? Or decided on Monday that you'll read 100 pages of a complex textbook every day when you haven't read a chapter in months? There's a big difference between being ambitious and being unrealistic. People who constantly fail to reach their goals often shoot for the stars without accounting for life's everyday demands. Whether it's juggling parenting, a full-time job, or other commitments, the expectation to do everything perfectly is a recipe for burnout. Ambition is great. Overextending yourself until you resent your own goal is not. In my own life, I used to juggle multiple major goals at once, like writing a book, launching a new workshop, and redecorating my entire home, all within the same 3 months. Eventually, something had to give, and I ended up feeling overwhelmed. Now, I structure my goals into manageable steps. Instead of renovating a whole house in one shot, I'll focus on one room at a time. It's far easier to celebrate small wins along the way than to lament over the fact that you're nowhere near the finish line. 3. They fear failure to the point of avoidance. Have you noticed that some people will talk non-stop about their aspirations but never actually start? In many cases, that's fear of failure masquerading as procrastination. It's easier to preserve the illusion that one day I'll do it than to risk putting in the effort and coming up short. This trait is something I see a lot in clients who are perfectionists. If they aren't certain they'll do it flawlessly, they'd rather not do it at all. It's a protective mechanism. By avoiding action, you also avoid the possibility of failing, or so the thinking goes. But ironically, you end up failing by default because you never begin. Brené Brown, a researcher well known for her work on vulnerability, has a quote that resonates here. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. Taking the first step toward your goal often requires being vulnerable, admitting that you don't have all the answers, you might mess up, or you might look silly. But that vulnerability is precisely where real progress and learning happen. 4. They rely on external validation. Let's be honest. It feels really good when people cheer you on, whether it's your partner telling you, "Go for it," or your social media followers liking your latest update. But if your motivation hinges solely on who's clapping for you, you'll find yourself stuck when those applause quiet down. People who repeatedly set goals without reaching them sometimes do it for the applause and attention they get just for announcing something new. It's the fun part, dreaming big and sharing it with others. But once the initial excitement fades, there's no internal drive to push through the inevitable monotony of day-to-day hustle. The goal just withers. I see this play out on social media all the time. It's easy to get swept up in the moment when you announce, "I'm going to run a marathon," and friends flood the comments with praise and likes. But that external validation can't carry you through the early morning runs in the pouring rain. At some point, it has to come from within. As Daniel Goleman, the author of Emotional Intelligence, points out, true self-motivation is an inside job. Self-awareness, knowing why you want this goal for yourself, coupled with self-regulation, helps you ride the waves of fluctuating external support. Your goal stops being about getting external validation and starts being about personal fulfillment. 5. They lack a concrete plan and keep moving the goalposts. Sometimes, folks think having an abstract dream is enough to make it a reality. They'll say, "I want to start a successful business," or "I want to get healthier." But they never outline the steps to get there. Without a roadmap, defined objectives, actionable tasks, and reasonable deadlines, these goals remain in the realm of wishful thinking. Worse still, some constantly shift their target whenever it seems out of reach. If their plan to save $5,000 by summer isn't panning out, they'll change it to maybe just $2,000 by fall. Or, well, I'll do it next year. The pattern continues, and nothing substantial ever gets done. This is where setting small milestones can be a game changer. I once worked with a client who wanted to write a self-help book, but never outlined chapters, never set writing deadlines, and never decided on key points to research. After months of going in circles, we broke it down, one chapter per month, with weekly bullet points to tackle. That simple act of structuring a plan changed her from someone who kept talking about writing to someone who actually wrote. 6. They give up when the going gets tough. You might have read my post on resilience and how crucial it is in reaching our long-term aspirations. But in case you missed it, here's a brief recap of what I mean. True success often hinges on our ability to stick with something when it stops being exciting and starts being just plain hard. If you've ever noticed someone who sets a goal, hits a roadblock, and promptly declares, "It's just not meant to be," you're looking at a common pattern. They bail as soon as obstacles arise. Rather than viewing challenges as opportunities to learn or refine their approach, they see them as proof that their goal was unachievable from the start. When I was learning pottery, which, by the way, is a lovely way to de-stress, I remember struggling to get the clay centered on the wheel. After a few wobbling attempts, I was tempted to think, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. But a more seasoned potter showed me a new way to steady my hands. That tiny adjustment helped me push through. Had I given up the moment it got tricky, I wouldn't have discovered how calming and fun pottery can be. 7. They surround themselves with the wrong influences. Finally, people who never follow through on their goals often have a circle of influences that either drags them down or fails to hold them accountable. Think about it. If you hang out with friends who dismiss your plans or mock the idea of self-improvement, it's harder to stay focused and motivated. Or perhaps you have well-meaning friends who nod politely whenever you share your latest dream, but don't challenge you to follow through when you start slacking. We all need accountability and positive reinforcement. That doesn't mean you need cheerleaders gushing over every step you take, but you do need folks who understand the importance of what you're striving for and who can encourage you or give you a loving nudge when you drift off track. If your environment isn't conducive to growth, you're setting yourself up for frustration. Take stock of the relationships and influences in your life. Do they inspire you or enable you to remain stuck? The bottom line: if you recognize any of these traits in your own life, know that it doesn't have to stay that way. Goal setting is a skill, one that involves clarity of purpose, a good dose of planning, a willingness to push through discomfort, and a supportive environment. Take a moment to reflect. Why do you really want what you say you want? Is it a meaningful, deeply rooted desire, or something you picked up because it sounded good at the time? Do you have a realistic plan in place, or is it more of a vague wish? Most importantly, are you ready to embrace the inevitable challenges and keep going when it's no longer fun? The beauty of personal growth is that with each stumble, we learn a little more about what makes us tick. No matter how many times you've fallen short of a goal, it's never too late to learn from those experiences and forge a new path. Here at Blog Herald, I've seen countless stories of people who once were chronic, set a goal then quit types, myself included, who transformed by identifying these traits, working through their underlying causes, and building sustainable strategies. The key is self-awareness and intentional action. Life is too short to spend it perpetually wishing for change that never comes. So, let's do ourselves a favor. Let's get real about why we keep dropping the ball. Figure out what's holding us back and rewrite that old story of always setting goals without ever quite reaching them. Remember, it's in the messy middle, where motivation fades and obstacles rise, that true growth happens. And trust me, crossing the finish line, even if it's just one small goal at a time, feels far better than living with the regret of not trying at all.